acetylcholine, the neurotransmitter that enables thought, memory, and movement. When people talk about brain chemicals, acetylcholine rarely gets the attention it deserves. It is not trendy, it is not dramatic, and it is not usually linked to motivation or pleasure. But without acetylcholine, you could not think clearly, form memories, focus your attention, or even move your muscles. In fact, acetylcholine was the first neurotransmitter ever discovered, and its discovery changed neuroscience forever. To understand acetylcholine, we need to start with its history. In the early 20th century, scientists were still debating a fundamental question. Do nerves communicate using electricity alone, or do they release chemicals? In 1921, a German pharmacologist named Otto Lowy performed a simple but revolutionary experiment. He took 2 frog hearts and placed them in separate containers filled with fluid. He stimulated the vagus nerve of the first heart, which caused the heart rate to slow down. Then he transferred the surrounding fluid from the first container to the second heart. Remarkably, the second heart also slowed down. This showed that a chemical substance had been released by the nerve and carried through the fluid. Lowy called this substance vagus stuff, meaning vagus substance. Later, it was identified as acetylcholine. This experiment proved that neurons communicate chemically, not just electrically. That single finding laid the foundation for modern neuroscience and pharmacology. So what is acetylcholine? Acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter involved in communication between neurons and between nerves and muscles. Unlike dopamine, which is closely tied to motivation and learning signals, acetylcholine is deeply involved in enabling mental clarity itself. It plays a central role in attention, learning, memory formation, muscle contraction, and the regulation of sleep and wakefulness. If dopamine helps decide what to pursue, acetylcholine helps you process information accurately once you are engaged. One of acetylcholine's most important roles is attention. Acetylcholine helps the brain focus on relevant sensory information and filter out noise. When acetylcholine levels rise in the cortex, neurons become more responsive to incoming signals. This improves signal clarity and reduces distraction. In simple terms, acetylcholine sharpens perception. This is why attention-demanding tasks, such as reading, studying, or listening carefully, rely heavily on acetylcholine activity. Without it, the brain becomes noisy, unfocused, and inefficient. Acetylcholine is also essential for learning and memory. It plays a major role in the hippocampus, a brain structure critical for forming new memories. High acetylcholine levels promote encoding, which means taking in new information. Lower acetylcholine levels promote retrieval, which means recalling stored information. This balance helps the brain avoid confusion between learning something new and remembering something old. Disrupting this system leads to memory problems. This is why acetylcholine is so strongly linked to conditions involving memory loss. One of the most important clinical connections involving acetylcholine is Alzheimer's disease. People with Alzheimer's show a significant loss of acetylcholine-producing neurons. This contributes directly to difficulties with memory, attention, and learning. Many Alzheimer's medications work by preventing the breakdown of acetylcholine, allowing it to remain active longer in the brain. These drugs do not cure the disease, but they can temporarily improve cognitive function by boosting acetylcholine signaling. This highlights how essential acetylcholine is for normal thinking. Acetylcholine is not only involved in cognition, it is also absolutely necessary for movement. At the neuromuscular junction, the connection between nerves and muscles, acetylcholine acts as the chemical messenger that tells muscles to contract. When a motor neuron fires, It releases acetylcholine onto the muscle fiber. This triggers muscle contraction. Without acetylcholine, voluntary movement would be impossible. This system is so precise that even small disruptions can cause serious problems. For example, in myasthenia gravis, the immune system attacks acetylcholine receptors, leading to muscle weakness and fatigue. Acetylcholine also plays a key role in sleep and consciousness. During waking and rapid eye movement sleep, acetylcholine activity is high. This supports alertness, dreaming, and cortical activation. During deep non-REM sleep, acetylcholine levels drop. This helps the brain disengage from the environment and enter restorative sleep states. In this way, acetylcholine helps regulate the rhythm between waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. Here are 5 clear examples of acetylcholine in everyday life. First, when you focus on a conversation in a noisy room, acetylcholine helps sharpen the relevant sounds and suppress background noise. Second, when you study new material, acetylcholine supports the encoding of new memories in the hippocampus. Third, when you recall information during an exam, changes in acetylcholine help shift the brain from learning mode to retrieval mode. Fourth, when you move your hand to pick up an object, acetylcholine enables the muscle contraction that makes the movement possible. Fifth, when you dream during sleep, acetylcholine helps activate the brain regions involved in vivid imagery and narrative experience. There are also some important facts about acetylcholine that are often overlooked. Acetylcholine was the first neurotransmitter ever identified. It is used in both the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. It acts on 2 major receptor types, called nicotinic and muscarinic receptors, which have very different effects. Nicotine mimics acetylcholine at certain receptors, which is why it strongly affects attention and alertness. Acetylcholine is rapidly broken down after release, allowing extremely precise control of neural signaling. So what is the big picture? Acetylcholine is not about pleasure or reward. It is about clarity, precision, and control. It helps the brain decide what information matters, how clearly it is processed, and whether new memories are formed. It enables thought, attention, memory, movement, and conscious experience itself. If dopamine motivates you to act, acetylcholine allows you to think clearly while doing it. And without acetylcholine, the mind would be noisy, unfocused, forgetful, and disconnected from the body.
If you enjoyed our channel, please click subscribe.
Dopamine, the chemical of motivation, learning, and prediction. When people talk about dopamine, they usually call it the pleasure chemical. It is blamed for addiction. It is blamed for distraction. And it is often described as the reason modern life means we are constantly overstimulated. But this description is deeply misleading. Dopamine is not about pleasure itself. It is about motivation, learning, and prediction. To understand dopamine properly, we need to start with its history. Dopamine was first identified as a chemical in the brain in the late 1950s. For many years, scientists believed dopamine was just a precursor, a stepping stone used by the brain to make another neurotransmitter called norepinephrine. It was not considered important in its own right. That changed in 1957 when Swedish neuroscientist Arvid Carlsson demonstrated that dopamine was not merely a building block, but a neurotransmitter with its own critical functions. Carlsson showed that dopamine was essential for movement. When dopamine levels were depleted in animals, the animals became rigid and immobile. When dopamine was restored, movement returned. This discovery directly led to the understanding of Parkinson's disease, which involves the loss of dopamine-producing neurons. Carlsson later received the Nobel Prize for this work. As research progressed, scientists discovered that dopamine was doing much more than controlling movement. It was deeply involved in motivation, learning, and decision-making. One of the most influential discoveries came from studies of dopamine neurons in the midbrain. Researchers found that dopamine neurons did not simply respond to rewards. Instead, they responded to changes in expectation. This led to one of the most important ideas in neuroscience: reward prediction error. Reward prediction error refers to the difference between what you expect and what actually happens. Dopamine activity increases when outcomes are better than expected. It decreases when outcomes are worse than expected. And it stays relatively stable when outcomes are exactly as predicted. This means dopamine is not signaling pleasure. It is signaling learning. It tells the brain whether its predictions about the world were correct and whether future behavior should be adjusted. Here is a simple example. Imagine you receive an unexpected compliment. Dopamine activity increases because the positive outcome was not predicted. Now, imagine receiving the same compliment every single day. Over time, dopamine activity decreases because the outcome becomes predictable. The experience may still feel pleasant, but dopamine no longer responds strongly. Dopamine is sensitive to surprise, not enjoyment. This leads to a crucial distinction in neuroscience. Wanting is not the same as liking. Liking refers to the experience of pleasure. Wanting refers to motivation, craving, and pursuit. Dopamine is primarily involved in wanting. You can strongly want something, even if you do not enjoy it very much. This explains why people often chase goals, habits, or rewards that no longer make them happy. Dopamine keeps pushing behavior forward even when satisfaction fades. Dopamine plays a central role in learning. When an action leads to a better-than-expected outcome, dopamine strengthens the neural pathways involved in that action. When an action leads to a worse-than-expected outcome, dopamine weakens those pathways. Over time, this shapes behavior. This is how habits form. This is how skills improve. And this is how behaviors become repeated, sometimes automatically. Dopamine is also deeply involved in decision-making. It helps the brain evaluate effort versus reward. Tasks that seem worthwhile trigger dopamine activity. Tasks that seem unrewarding or pointless do not. This is why motivation can disappear when rewards feel uncertain or delayed. It is also why anticipation often feels more intense than the reward itself. Dopamine peaks during the chase, not the outcome. One of the most misunderstood areas involving dopamine is addiction. Addiction is often described as too much pleasure, but that is not accurate. In addiction, dopamine systems become sensitized. Cues associated with the addictive behavior trigger intense dopamine responses. At the same time, the pleasurable effects of the substance or behavior often demonstrate tolerance and decline. Craving increases. Enjoyment decreases. This is why addiction is compulsive rather than joyful. Dopamine has taught the brain that the behavior is extremely important, even when it is no longer satisfying. Dopamine is also involved in movement. In the motor system, dopamine helps initiate and regulate voluntary action. In Parkinson's disease, dopamine-producing neurons gradually die. This leads to tremor, stiffness, and difficulty initiating movement. Treatments that increase dopamine levels can improve motor function, highlighting dopamine's essential role in action. Here are 5 everyday examples of dopamine at work. First, when you feel you cannot stop checking your phone, dopamine is driving anticipation and habit, not pleasure. Second, when learning a new skill feels exciting at first and then becomes routine, dopamine activity decreases as predictions improve. Third, when a reward feels disappointing despite high expectations, dopamine drops sharply. Fourth, When a habit becomes automatic, dopamine helped train the brain long before the habit felt effortless. Fifth, when motivation disappears despite knowing something is important, dopamine signaling related to expected reward has weakened. There are several key facts about dopamine that are often misunderstood. Dopamine does not equal happiness. High dopamine can coexist with stress, anxiety, or burnout. Dopamine does not get used up or depleted by pleasure. Dopamine neurons fire in patterns related to learning and prediction, not constant reward. Blocking dopamine does not eliminate pleasure, but it does reduce motivation. Increasing dopamine does not guarantee satisfaction. So what is the big picture? Dopamine is not the pleasure chemical. It is a motivation signal. It is a learning mechanism. It is a prediction system. Dopamine tells the brain what to pursue, what to repeat, and what to avoid. It helps the brain adapt to the world by learning from surprise and expectation. If acetylcholine allows clear thinking and notice, dopamine provides the drive to act. And understanding dopamine properly helps explain habits, addiction, burnout, modern distraction, and why chasing rewards does not always lead to happiness.
If you enjoyed our channel, please click subscribe.
Serotonin, the brain's regulator of mood, balance, and emotional stability. When people talk about serotonin, it is usually called the happiness chemical. It is often blamed for depression. It is often credited for well-being. And it is commonly described as the brain's feel-good substance. But serotonin is not simply about happiness. Serotonin is about balance. It helps regulate mood, emotion, patience, impulse control, and the ability to feel stable over time. To understand emotional well-being, resilience, and mental health, we need to understand serotonin properly. The story of serotonin begins in the early 20th century. In the 1930s and 1940s, scientists studying blood chemistry identified a substance that caused blood vessels to constrict. This substance was later named serotonin, derived from serum and tonic. Soon after, researchers discovered that serotonin was also present in the brain. By the 1950s, it became clear that serotonin functioned as a neurotransmitter. This discovery transformed psychiatry and neuroscience. Serotonin quickly became central to theories of mood, emotion, and mental health. So what does serotonin actually do? At its core, serotonin regulates emotional tone and behavioral stability. Rather than creating pleasure or excitement, serotonin helps smooth emotional responses. It reduces extremes. It promotes patience, impulse control, and emotional consistency. If dopamine drives pursuit and norepinephrine drives urgency, serotonin helps you feel settled enough not to constantly react. Serotonin plays a key role in mood regulation. Low or dysregulated serotonin activity is associated with depression, anxiety, and mood instability. It helps the brain maintain a stable baseline, allowing emotions to rise and fall without becoming overwhelming. This is why serotonin is often described as a mood stabilizer rather than a pleasure signal. Serotonin is also deeply involved in impulse control. Adequate serotonin function helps inhibit impulsive behavior. Low serotonin activity is linked to increased impulsivity, aggression, and risk-taking. This does not mean serotonin makes people passive. It means serotonin helps pause action long enough for reflection. It supports self-control and emotional regulation. Serotonin also influences anxiety. In many brain regions, serotonin helps dampen excessive fear responses. When serotonin signaling is balanced, stresses feel manageable. When serotonin systems are dysregulated, worry and rumination can increase. This is why many treatments for anxiety disorders target serotonin systems. They aim to restore balance, not induce pleasure. Serotonin plays a significant role in sleep. It helps regulate sleep-wake cycles and interacts closely with melatonin. Serotonin activity during the day supports alertness and emotional stability. At night, serotonin contributes to the production of melatonin, which helps initiate sleep. Disruptions in serotonin regulation can lead to sleep disturbances and fatigue. Serotonin also affects appetite and digestion. In fact, the majority of the body's serotonin is found in the gastrointestinal system. Serotonin helps regulate gut movement, appetite, and satiety. This strong connection between serotonin and the gut is one reason emotional states can influence digestion and vice versa. Here are 5 everyday examples of serotonin at work. First, when you feel emotionally steady rather than euphoric, serotonin is helping maintain balance. Second, when you resist an impulsive reaction and pause before responding, serotonin is supporting self-control. Third, when long-term contentment matters more than immediate excitement, serotonin is helping regulate priorities. Fourth, when anxiety feels manageable rather than overwhelming, balanced serotonin signaling is involved. Fifth, when sleep patterns feel regular and restorative, serotonin is contributing to healthy circadian rhythms. There are several important facts about serotonin that are often misunderstood. Serotonin is not the same as happiness. High serotonin does not mean constant joy. Serotonin acts through many different receptor types, each with distinct effects. Most antidepressant medications target serotonin systems indirectly, not by adding happiness, but by increasing availability. Serotonin interacts closely with dopamine, norepinephrine, and GABA. Dysregulation of serotonin is linked to depression, anxiety, obsessive thinking, and impulse control disorders. So what is the big picture? Serotonin is not a reward chemical. It is not a motivation signal. It is a regulator. It helps stabilize mood, control impulses, and support emotional resilience. If dopamine provides drive, norepinephrine provides urgency, acetylcholine provides clarity, glutamate provides information, and GABA provides braking, serotonin provides emotional balance. It helps the brain feel steady enough to function well over time. Understanding serotonin helps explain mood disorders, anxiety, self-control, and why emotional health is about stability, not constant happiness.
If you enjoyed our channel, please click subscribe.
Glutamate, the brain's main excitatory signal and the foundation of learning. When people think about neurotransmitters, glutamate is rarely mentioned. It is not linked to happiness. It is not linked to motivation. And it does not have the cultural reputation of dopamine or serotonin. Yet glutamate is the most important excitatory neurotransmitter in the human brain. Without glutamate, there would be no learning, no memory, no perception, and no conscious thought. In many ways, glutamate is the chemical language of the cortex itself. To understand how the brain works, we must understand glutamate. The story of glutamate begins earlier than most people realize. In the early 20th century, scientists knew that glutamic acid was present in the brain, but they assumed it was simply a metabolic substance. It was abundant, so it seemed unlikely to be a neurotransmitter. At the time, researchers believed that neurotransmitters had to be rare and specialized. This assumption delayed the recognition of glutamate's true role. It was not until the 1950s and 1960s that researchers began to show that glutamate could directly excite neurons. By the 1980s, glutamate was firmly established is the brain's primary excitatory neurotransmitter. Today, it is understood that the vast majority of fast communication between neurons in the brain depends on glutamate. So what is glutamate? Glutamate is the main chemical signal neurons use to activate other neurons. When glutamate is released, it increases the likelihood that the receiving neuron will fire. In simple terms, glutamate makes neural activity happen. Every thought, every perception, every memory, and every decision relies on glutamate-driven signaling. If dopamine tells the brain what to pursue, and acetylcholine sharpens processing, glutamate is the signal that carries the information itself. Glutamate is absolutely central to learning and memory. One of the most important discoveries in neuroscience is long-term potentiation. Long-term potentiation refers to the strengthening of synaptic connections after repeated activation. This process depends heavily on glutamate receptors, especially NMDA and AMPA receptors. When glutamate repeatedly activates a synapse, the connection becomes stronger and more efficient. This is how experiences leave physical traces in the brain. This is how learning happens. This is how memories are formed. The hippocampus, a brain structure essential for forming new memories, is densely packed with glutamate receptors. When glutamate signaling is disrupted in the hippocampus, memory formation suffers. This is why glutamate is often described as the molecular basis of learning. Without glutamate, the brain cannot store new information effectively. Glutamate is also essential for perception. Sensory information from the eyes, ears, and skin is transmitted through glutamate-based pathways. When you see, hear, or feel something, glutamate is carrying that information across neural circuits. Your experience of the world depends on glutamate-driven communication. Even complex mental imagery relies on glutamate activity within the cortex. Glutamate also plays a role in movement. Motor commands from the brain to the spinal cord rely on excitatory glutamate signals. While acetylcholine activates muscles directly, glutamate helps plan, initiate, and coordinate movement at higher levels of the nervous system. Without glutamate, movement would be poorly organized and imprecise. Here are 5 everyday examples of glutamate at work. First, when you learn a new fact, glutamate helps strengthen the synaptic connections that store that information. Second, when you recognize a face, glutamate allows visual information to flow rapidly through the cortex. Third, when you practice a skill, repeated glutamate signaling reshapes neural circuits to improve performance. Fourth, when you focus on a complex problem, glutamate activity supports sustained cortical processing. Fifth, when you recall a memory, glutamate helps reactivate the neural patterns associated with that experience. Because glutamate is so powerful, it must be carefully regulated. Too little glutamate activity leads to cognitive impairment and reduced consciousness. Too much glutamate activity can be toxic. This is known as excitotoxicity. Excessive glutamate release can overstimulate neurons, leading to cell damage or death. Excitotoxicity is implicated in conditions such as stroke, traumatic brain injury, and some neurodegenerative diseases. This shows that glutamate is essential, but potentially dangerous if uncontrolled. Glutamate is also closely balanced with another neurotransmitter, GABA. While glutamate excites neurons, GABA inhibits them. Healthy brain function depends on a balance between excitation and inhibition. Too much excitation leads to seizures and overstimulation. Too much inhibition leads to sluggish thinking and reduced responsiveness. The brain constantly adjusts glutamate and GABA activity to maintain stability. There are several important facts about glutamate that are often misunderstood. Glutamate is involved in nearly all fast brain communication. Most neurons in the cortex use glutamate as their primary neurotransmitter. Glutamate acts on multiple receptor types, each with different effects and time courses. Glutamate is essential for plasticity, the brain's ability to change with experience. Disruptions to glutamate signaling are linked to conditions such as epilepsy, schizophrenia, depression, and neurodegeneration. So, what is the big picture? Glutamate is not about pleasure, motivation, or mood. It is about information. It is the primary signal that allows neurons to communicate, learn, and adapt. It is the foundation of memory, perception, and thought itself. If dopamine provides drive, and acetylcholine provides clarity, glutamate provides content. Without glutamate, the brain would be silent. And understanding glutamate is essential for understanding how the mind is built from neural activity.
If you enjoyed our channel, please click subscribe.
Norepinephrine, the brain's signal for alertness, arousal, and readiness. When people hear the word norepinephrine, they often think of stress. They associate it with anxiety. They associate it with panic. And they associate it with the fight or flight response. But norepinephrine is not simply a stress chemical. It is a core system that keeps the brain alert, responsive, and ready to act. Without norepinephrine, you would struggle to stay awake, focus under pressure, or respond quickly to important events. To understand attention, arousal, and resilience, we need to understand norepinephrine. The history of norepinephrine begins in the early 20th century. Scientists studying the sympathetic nervous system noticed that stimulating certain nerves produced effects similar to adrenaline. This led to the discovery of norepinephrine as a chemical messenger used by both the brain and the body. In the 1940s and 1950s, researchers established that norepinephrine functions as a neurotransmitter in the brain and as a hormone in the peripheral nervous system. Unlike dopamine, which was once thought to be unimportant, norepinephrine was recognized early as a powerful regulator of physiological arousal. One of the most important breakthroughs in understanding norepinephrine came from research on a small structure in the brainstem called the locus coeruleus. The locus coeruleus is the primary source of norepinephrine in the brain. Despite its small size, it sends projections throughout the cortex, hippocampus, thalamus, and spinal cord. This wide influence allows norepinephrine to rapidly change the state of the entire brain. When the locus coeruleus fires, the brain shifts into a state of heightened alertness. So what does norepinephrine actually do? At its core, norepinephrine regulates arousal, vigilance, and responsiveness. It helps the brain detect important or threatening information and mobilize resources to deal with it. Norepinephrine increases signal strength in neural circuits. It enhances the processing of salient information and suppresses background noise. In this way, norepinephrine acts as a gain control system. It turns up the volume on what matters. Norepinephrine plays a crucial role in attention. Moderate levels of norepinephrine improve focus, working memory, and cognitive flexibility. This is why a certain level of alertness improves performance. However, too much norepinephrine impairs thinking. Excessive arousal narrows attention, disrupts working memory, and promotes rigid, habitual responses. This relationship is often described by the inverted U-shaped curve of arousal and performance. Optimal cognition occurs at moderate levels of norepinephrine. Norepinephrine is deeply involved in the stress response. When the brain detects threat or challenge, norepinephrine is released rapidly. This increases heart rate, blood pressure, and readiness for action. In the brain, It shifts processing away from slow, reflective thinking and toward fast, survival-oriented responses. This is helpful in emergencies, but when stress is chronic, sustained norepinephrine activity can impair cognition and emotional regulation. Norepinephrine also plays a role in learning and memory. Emotionally significant events trigger norepinephrine release, which strengthens memory formation. This is why memories formed during stressful or exciting moments are often vivid and long-lasting. Norepinephrine helps tag important experiences so they are remembered. However, extreme stress can impair memory encoding, showing again that balance is essential. Norepinephrine is also involved in sleep and wakefulness. High norepinephrine activity is associated with wakefulness and alertness. During deep sleep and REM sleep, norepinephrine activity drops sharply. This reduction helps the brain disengage from the external environment. Disruptions to norepinephrine regulation can lead to sleep problems and fatigue. Here are 5 everyday examples of norepinephrine at work. First, when you suddenly hear a loud noise, norepinephrine helps snap your attention to it immediately. Second, when you feel mentally sharp under mild pressure, norepinephrine is enhancing focus and alertness. Third, when stress makes your thinking feel scattered or rigid, excessive norepinephrine is interfering with cognition. Fourth, when emotionally intense moments are remembered vividly, norepinephrine helped strengthen those memories. Fifth, when caffeine makes you feel more awake, it indirectly increases norepinephrine activity. There are several important facts about norepinephrine that are often overlooked. Norepinephrine acts as both a neurotransmitter and a hormone. It is closely related to adrenaline, but serves distinct functions in the brain. It works in tight coordination with dopamine and acetylcholine. Many medications for attention disorders and depression target norepinephrine systems. Dysregulation of norepinephrine is linked to anxiety, depression, PTSD, and ADHD. So what is the big picture? Norepinephrine is not just a stress signal. It is the brain's alertness and readiness system. It tunes attention, enhances responsiveness, and helps the brain adapt to challenge. If dopamine provides motivation, acetylcholine provides clarity, and glutamate provides information, norepinephrine provides urgency. It prepares the brain and body to respond when something matters. Understanding norepinephrine helps explain attention, stress, performance, and why balance is critical for optimal cognition.
If you enjoyed our channel, please click subscribe.
GABA, the brain's primary brake and the foundation of calm and control. When people think about brain chemicals, they usually focus on those that excite, motivate, or energize. Much less attention is given to the chemical that slows things down. But without inhibition, the brain would not function at all. GABA is the brain's primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. It acts as the nervous system's brake pedal. Without GABA, thoughts would race uncontrollably, movements would become chaotic, and the brain would quickly overload itself. To understand calm, control, and stability, we need to understand GABA. The story of GABA begins in the mid-20th century. In the 1950s, researchers discovered that gamma-aminobutyric acid, or GABA, was present in large quantities in the brain. At first, scientists assumed it was simply a metabolic byproduct, but experiments soon showed something remarkable. When GABA was applied to neurons, it reduced their activity. Instead of exciting neurons like glutamate, GABA made neurons less likely to fire. By the late 1950s, GABA was firmly established as the brain's main inhibitory neurotransmitter. This discovery helped explain how the brain prevents runaway excitation. So, what does GABA actually do? Well, at its core, GABA reduces neural activity. When GABA binds to its receptors, it makes neurons less responsive to incoming signals. This does not shut the brain down. Instead, it fine-tunes activity, preventing excessive firing and allowing information to be processed in an organized way. If glutamate drives neural activity forward, GABA keeps it under control. Healthy brain function depends on a balance between excitation and inhibition. GABA plays a critical role in anxiety and emotional regulation. When GABA activity is high, neural circuits involved in fear and stress are dampened. This produces a calming effect. When GABA activity is low or poorly regulated, neural activity becomes excessive. This can lead to anxiety, restlessness, and heightened emotional reactivity. Many anxiety disorders are associated with reduced GABA function or impaired inhibitory control. GABA is also essential for sleep. During sleep, especially deep non-REM sleep, GABA activity increases. This suppresses wake-promoting brain regions and allows the brain to disengage from the environment. Without sufficient GABA activity, falling asleep and staying asleep becomes difficult. This is why many sleep medications enhance GABA signaling. They do not create sleep directly. They reduce neural noise so sleep can occur. GABA is crucial for motor control. In motor systems, GABA helps prevent unwanted movements. It ensures that only the intended muscles are activated, while others remain inhibited. When GABA signaling in motor circuits is disrupted, movement becomes unstable. This can lead to tremors, muscle rigidity, or involuntary movements. Smooth, coordinated movement depends on precise inhibitory control. GABA also plays a major role in cognition. It helps regulate attention, working memory, and information flow. By suppressing irrelevant neural activity, GABA allows important signals to stand out. This improves focus and reduces mental clutter. Too little inhibition leads to distractibility and cognitive overload. Too much inhibition leads to slowed thinking and reduced responsiveness. Again, balance is key. Here are 5 everyday examples of GABA at work. First, when you feel calm after a stressful moment passes, GABA activity helps settle neural circuits. Second, when you are able to focus on one task without being overwhelmed, GABA is suppressing distractions. Third, when you fall asleep and your thoughts slow down, GABA is quieting wake-promoting systems. Fourth, when your movements feel smooth and controlled, GABA is preventing unnecessary muscle activation. Fifth, when anxiety feels overwhelming, reduced or ineffective GABA signaling may be involved. Because GABA is so important, disruptions to GABA systems can have serious consequences. Too little inhibition can lead to seizures, as seen in epilepsy. Excessive excitation without sufficient GABA control allows neural activity to spiral out of control. On the other hand, excessive GABA activity can cause sedation, slowed cognition, and impaired coordination. This is why substances that strongly enhance GABA, such as alcohol or certain sedatives, impair judgment and motor control. There are several important facts about GABA that are often overlooked. GABA is the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter in the adult brain. It acts through multiple receptor types, including fast and slow inhibitory mechanisms. Many commonly used drugs act on GABA systems, including benzodiazepines, alcohol, and some anesthetics. GABA works in constant balance with glutamate. Disruptions in GABA balance are linked to anxiety disorders, epilepsy, insomnia, and some mood disorders. So what is the big picture? GABA is not about excitement or reward. It is about stability, control, and balance. It prevents the brain from becoming overwhelmed by its own activity. If glutamate provides acceleration, GABA provides braking. If dopamine drives pursuit, GABA prevents impulsive overload. And if acetylcholine sharpens clarity, GABA protects the brain from noise. Without GABA, the brain would be fast, loud, and unstable. With GABA, the brain can think clearly, move smoothly, and rest when needed.
If you enjoyed our channel, please click subscribe.
Epinephrine, adrenaline. Epinephrine, also known as adrenaline, the body's rapid response and emergency signal. When people hear the word adrenaline, they think of excitement. They think of thrill-seeking. They think of heart-pounding moments. And they think of extreme sports or fear. But adrenaline is not about fun or excitement. Adrenaline is about survival. It is the body's fastest emergency signal, designed to mobilize energy and action in seconds. To understand fear, stress, and rapid response, we need to understand adrenaline properly. The history of adrenaline begins at the turn of the 20th century. In 1895, British physiologist George Oliver and scientist Edward Schaefer demonstrated that extracts from the adrenal glands had powerful effects on blood pressure. In 1971, Japanese chemist Yokichi Takamine successfully isolated the active substance and named it adrenaline. This was one of the first hormones ever identified. The discovery showed that the body uses chemical messengers to coordinate rapid whole-body responses. Adrenaline, also known as epinephrine, is both a hormone and a neurotransmitter. It is released primarily by the adrenal medulla into the bloodstream. Unlike neurotransmitters that act locally in the brain, adrenaline circulates throughout the body. This allows it to produce widespread and immediate effects. Adrenaline prepares the entire organism for action. So what does adrenaline actually do? At its core, adrenaline mobilizes energy and enhances physical readiness. It increases heart rate and blood pressure. It redirects blood flow to muscles. It dilates airways to improve oxygen intake. It releases glucose into the bloodstream for immediate energy. All of this happens rapidly. Adrenaline does not promote careful thinking. It promotes action. Adrenaline plays a central role in the fight or flight response. When the brain detects threat, the sympathetic nervous system is activated. Adrenaline is released within seconds. This response evolved to help organisms escape danger or confront threats. In modern life, the same system is triggered by psychological stress, not just physical danger. This is why adrenaline surges can occur during public speaking, exams, or sudden emotional events. In the brain, adrenaline's role is more limited than that of norepinephrine. While norepinephrine is the primary stress-related neurotransmitter within the brain, adrenaline supports peripheral arousal and reinforces urgency. Together, they coordinate rapid alertness and bodily readiness. Adrenaline ensures the body is prepared to act when the brain signals danger. Adrenaline also affects perception and memory. During high adrenaline moments, attention narrows and focus sharpens on immediate threats. This can distort time perception, making moments feel slowed down or intensified. Adrenaline also contributes to the formation of strong emotional memories, especially those involving fear or danger. Here are 5 everyday examples of adrenaline at work. First, when your heart races after a sudden loud noise, adrenaline is driving rapid physiological arousal. Second, when you feel shaky or energized during a stressful event, adrenaline is mobilizing energy. Third, when time seems to slow during an emergency, adrenaline is sharpening focus and perception. Fourth, when you feel exhausted after intense stress, adrenaline levels are dropping after sustained activation. Fifth, when excitement turns into physical tension, adrenaline is pushing the body into action mode. There are several important facts about adrenaline that are often misunderstood. Adrenaline is not a pleasure chemical. It does not create happiness. It enhances arousal and readiness, not enjoyment. Chronic adrenaline release is harmful and contributes to stress-related illness. Adrenaline works closely with norepinephrine and cortisol. The body is designed for brief adrenaline bursts, not constant activation. Adrenaline is essential in emergencies, but problematic when activated too often. Repeated stress can lead to fatigue, anxiety, and burnout. The system that evolved to save lives can become damaging when triggered constantly by modern stressors. This is why stress management and recovery are biologically necessary, not luxuries. So, what is the big picture? Adrenaline is not about thrill. It is about survival. It is the body's rapid emergency signal. If dopamine drives pursuit, norepinephrine signals urgency, acetylcholine sharpens clarity, glutamate carries information, GABA provides braking, serotonin stabilizes mood, endorphins provides relief, oxytocin provides connection, glycine provides precision, histamine provides wakefulness, adrenaline provides action. It tells the body, move now. Understanding adrenaline helps explain stress responses, panic, fear, and why constant pressure exhausts the system.
If you enjoyed our channel, please click subscribe.
Histamine, the brain's signal for wakefulness, attention, and alert. When people hear the word histamine, they usually think of allergies. They think of hay fever. They think of itching and sneezing. They think of antihistamine tablets that make them sleepy. But histamine is far more than an allergy chemical. In the brain, histamine is a powerful regulator of wakefulness, attention, and mental alertness. Without histamine, staying awake, focused, and cognitively engaged would be extremely difficult. To understand arousal, attention, and why drowsiness occurs, we need to understand histamine. The history of histamine begins in the early 20th century. Histamine was first isolated in 1910 by British scientists George Barger and Henry Dale. Soon after, researchers discovered that histamine was naturally produced in the body and involved in immune and inflammatory responses. By the mid-20th century, histamine's role in allergic reactions was well established. Later, scientists discovered that histamine is also produced in the brain, where it acts as a neurotransmitter. This shifted histamine from being viewed purely as an immune chemical to a key regulator of brain state. In the brain, histamine-producing neurons are located primarily in a small region of the hypothalamus called the tuberomammillary nucleus. Despite being few in number, these neurons send widespread projections throughout the cortex, thalamus, and brain stem. This allows histamine to influence the overall level of brain activation. When histamine neurons are active, the brain is awake and alert. When histamine activity drops, drowsiness increases. So what does histamine actually do? At its core, histamine promotes wakefulness and attentional readiness. It increases cortical activation and supports sustained alertness. Histamine helps prevent the brain from slipping into sleep during waking hours. Histamine plays a crucial role in attention. It helps maintain vigilance over long periods of time. Tasks that require sustained focus rely on histamine signaling to keep the brain engaged. When histamine activity is low, attention becomes fragmented and mental fatigue increases. This is why antihistamine medications that block histamine receptors often cause drowsiness and reduced concentration. Histamine is also deeply involved in sleep-wake regulation. During wakefulness, histamine neuron firing is high. During sleep, especially non-REM sleep, histamine activity drops sharply. This reduction allows sleep-promoting systems to take over. Histamine does not initiate sleep. It prevents sleep. Its job is to keep the brain awake when it needs to be. Histamine also interacts with appetite and energy regulation. Histamine activity in the hypothalamus helps suppress appetite and regulate feeding behavior. Reduced histamine signaling is associated with increased hunger and weight gain. This is one reason some antihistamine medications are linked to increased appetite. Histamine also influences learning and memory indirectly. By maintaining wakefulness and attentional capacity, histamine supports the conditions needed for learning. Without adequate histamine activity, the brain struggles to stay engaged long enough for effective encoding to occur. Histamine does not store memories. It helps keep the brain awake enough to form them. Here are 5 everyday examples of histamine at work. First, when you feel alert and awake during the day, histamine is supporting cortical activation. Second, when antihistamines make you feel drowsy, blocked histamine signaling is reducing wakefulness. Third, when sustained attention becomes difficult late at night, histamine activity is naturally declining. Fourth, when mental fog appears during fatigue, reduced histamine signaling is contributing. Fifth, when appetite increases after taking sedating medications, histamine suppression is involved. There are several important facts about histamine that are often misunderstood. Histamine is not only an immune chemical. It acts as a neurotransmitter in the brain. Histamine neurons are few, but highly influential. Histamine interacts closely with acetylcholine, norepinephrine, and orexin systems. Blocking histamine receptors is one of the most common causes of medication-induced drowsiness. Disruptions to histamine regulation are linked to sleep disorders and attention difficulties. So, what is the big picture? Histamine is not about emotion or reward. It is about wakefulness and readiness. It keeps the brain alert, attentive, and capable of sustained cognition. If dopamine drives pursuit, norepinephrine signals urgency. Acetylcholine sharpens clarity. Glutamate carries information. GABA provides braking. Serotonin stabilizes mood. Endorphins provide relief. Oxytocin provides connection. And glycine provides precision. Histamine provides wakefulness. It tells the brain, stay awake, stay alert. The world still matters. Understanding histamine helps explain sleepiness, attention, medication effects, and the biological foundations of mental fatigue.
If you enjoyed our channel, please click subscribe.
Oxytocin, the brain's signal for trust, bonding, and social safety. Oxytocin is often called the love hormone. It is linked to bonding, it is linked to trust, and it is frequently described as the chemical behind connection and intimacy. But oxytocin is not simply about love or warmth. Oxytocin is about social safety. It helps the brain decide who is safe, who is familiar, and when it is appropriate to relax, connect, and rely on others. To understand attachment, trust, and social behavior, we need to understand oxytocin properly. The history of oxytocin begins in the early 20th century. Oxytocin was first identified in 1976 by British physiologist Henry Dale, who discovered that extracts from the pituitary gland caused uterine contractions. The name oxytocin comes from Greek words meaning quick birth. For decades, oxytocin was studied primarily as a hormone involved in childbirth and lactation. Later, Scientists discovered that oxytocin is also released in the brain, where it acts as a neuromodulator, influencing emotion and social behavior. This shifted oxytocin from being viewed as a reproductive hormone to a key social chemical. So what does oxytocin actually do? At its core, oxytocin reduces fear and increases social approach. It helps dampen threat responses, particularly in social contexts. When oxytocin is active, the brain becomes more sensitive to social cues, facial expressions, tone of voice, and emotional signals from others. Oxytocin does not create trust automatically. Instead, it amplifies social relevance. It strengthens bonds that already exist and increases attention to social information. Oxytocin plays a crucial role in attachment. It is released during childbirth, breastfeeding, and close physical contact. These releases help form strong bonds between parents and infants. Oxytocin supports caregiving behavior by reducing stress and increasing sensitivity to others' needs. This is one reason early social experiences have such a powerful impact on emotional development. Oxytocin is also involved in romantic and social bonding. Physical touch, prolonged eye contact, and shared emotional experiences can trigger oxytocin release. This promotes feelings of closeness and emotional safety. However, oxytocin does not make everyone trustworthy. It increases bonding within groups, which can sometimes increase distance from outsiders. This highlights that oxytocin is about bonding, not universal kindness. Oxytocin also interacts with stress systems. It can reduce activity in brain regions associated with fear and threat. This allows people to feel calmer in the presence of trusted others. In supportive social environments, oxytocin helps buffer stress and promote resilience. In unsafe or hostile environments, oxytocin may heighten awareness of social threats instead. Here are 5 everyday examples of oxytocin at work. First, when physical affection makes you feel calm and safe, oxytocin is helping reduce stress responses. Second, when a baby calms in response to a caregiver's voice or touch, oxytocin is supporting attachment and regulation. Third, when shared laughter or emotional moments strengthen friendships, oxytocin is reinforcing social bonds. Fourth, when trust builds gradually through repeated positive interactions, oxytocin is helping encode social safety. Fifth, when being with familiar people makes challenges feel more manageable, oxytocin is buffering stress. There are several important facts about oxytocin that are often misunderstood. Oxytocin does not automatically make people kind or generous. It strengthens existing social bonds rather than creating trust out of nothing. Oxytocin can increase in-group bonding and out-group caution. It acts both as a hormone in the body and a neuromodulator in the brain. Oxytocin interacts closely with dopamine, serotonin, and stress hormones. Disruptions in oxytocin systems are linked to attachment difficulties and social anxiety. So what is the big picture? Oxytocin is not simply the love hormone. It is the brain's social safety signal. It helps reduce fear, strengthen bonds, and support connection with trusted others. If dopamine drives pursuit, norepinephrine signals urgency, acetylcholine sharpens clarity, glutamate carries information, GABA provides braking, serotonin stabilizes mood, and endorphins provides relief. Oxytocin provides connection. It tells the brain, you are safe with these people. Understanding oxytocin helps explain attachment, trust, bonding, and why social support is one of the most powerful regulators of stress and well-being.
If you enjoyed our channel, please click subscribe.
Endorphins, the brain's natural painkillers and stress buffers. When people hear the word endorphins, they usually think of exercise, They think of runner's highs. They think of feel-good chemicals. And they often assume endorphins are simply about pleasure. But endorphins are not primarily about happiness. Endorphins are about pain regulation, stress tolerance, and survival. They allow the brain and body to keep functioning during injury, exhaustion, and extreme challenge. To understand pain, resilience, and why humans can push far beyond normal limits, we need to understand endorphins. The history of endorphins begins in the 1970s. For decades, scientists knew that drugs like morphine and heroin reduced pain by acting on specific receptors in the brain. But this raised a powerful question. Why would the brain have receptors for plant-derived drugs? In 1975, researchers discovered the answer. The brain produces its own morphine-like substances. These naturally occurring opioids were named endorphins, short for endogenous morphine. This discovery transformed neuroscience and medicine. It showed that the brain has an internal pain control system built into its biology. So what are endorphins? Endorphins are neuropeptides that bind to opioid receptors in the brain and body. Their primary role is to reduce pain and dampen distress. Unlike fast neurotransmitters, such as glutamate or GABA, endorphins act more slowly and have longer-lasting effects. They do not transmit precise information. They change the overall state of the system. Endorphins help the organism endure. One of the most important functions of endorphins is pain modulation. When the body experiences injury, intense exertion, or stress, endorphins are released. They reduce the subjective experience of pain. This does not mean the injury disappears. It means the brain temporarily prioritizes survival and action over discomfort. This system evolved because pain avoidance is not always adaptive in emergencies. Endorphins are also involved in stress regulation. During extreme stress, endorphins blunt emotional distress and fear. They can produce a sense of numbness or calm during traumatic events. This response can be protective in the short term. However, repeated activation through chronic stress can alter emotional processing. This shows that endorphins are powerful, but not benign. Endorphins are often associated with pleasure, but this is a misunderstanding. Endorphins do not produce excitement or motivation. They reduce negative sensations. Any positive feeling associated with endorphins comes from relief, not reward. This is why endorphins are better described as painkillers than pleasure chemicals. Relief can feel good, but it is not the same as joy. Exercise is one of the most well-known triggers of endorphin release. During prolonged or intense physical activity, endorphins help reduce pain and fatigue. This allows continued movement even as muscles become stressed. The so-called runner's high is not pure happiness. It is a state of reduced pain perception and altered awareness. Other systems, including dopamine and endocannabinoids, also contribute to this experience. Endorphins also play a role in social bonding. Physical touch, laughter, and shared positive experiences can trigger endorphin release. This helps reinforce social connection by reducing stress and promoting feelings of safety. In this way, endorphins support group cohesion and emotional resilience. Here are 5 everyday examples of endorphins at work. First, when an injury initially hurts less than expected, endorphins are dampening pain signals. Second, when intense exercise feels manageable despite physical strain, endorphins are reducing discomfort. Third, when laughter leaves you feeling relaxed and relieved, endorphins are involved. Fourth, when emotional numbness occurs during extreme stress, endorphins are buffering distress. Fifth, when pain relief feels calming rather than exciting, endorphins are producing relief, not reward. There are several important facts about endorphins that are often misunderstood. Endorphins are not the same as dopamine. They do not drive motivation or goal pursuit. They act on opioid receptors, the same receptors targeted by powerful pain-killing drugs. Artificial opioids can hijack this system, leading to tolerance and dependence. Endorphins evolved to be released in specific contexts, not continuously. Chronic overstimulation of opioid systems disrupts natural pain regulation. Endorphins also interact closely with other neurotransmitters. They reduce pain so dopamine-driven behavior can continue. They dampen stress responses involving norepinephrine. They support GABA in calming neural activity. Endorphins do not act alone. They work as part of a coordinated survival system. So what is the big picture? Endorphins are not happiness chemicals. They are survival chemicals. They reduce pain, blunt distress, and allow the organism to endure extreme conditions. If dopamine drives pursuit, norepinephrine signals urgency, acetylcholine sharpens clarity, glutamate carries information, GABA provides braking, and serotonin stabilizes mood. Endorphins provide relief. They help the brain say, "You can keep going." Understanding endorphins helps explain pain tolerance, resilience, trauma responses, exercise effects, and why relief can feel powerful without being joyful.
If you enjoyed our channel, please click subscribe.
Glycine, the quiet regulator of inhibition, precision, and neural balance. Glycine is one of the least talked about neurotransmitters. It is not associated with pleasure. It is not associated with motivation, and it rarely appears in popular discussions of the brain. Yet without glycine, basic neural control would fail. Glycine plays a crucial role in inhibition, precision, and stability, especially in the spinal cord and brainstem. It works quietly in the background, ensuring that neural signals remain controlled, coordinated, and accurate. To understand how the nervous system maintains order, we need to understand glycine. The history of glycine begins in the early 20th century. Glycine was first identified as a simple amino acid in the 1800s, but for many years it was thought to be only a building block of proteins. In the mid-20th century, researchers studying spinal reflexes noticed that some inhibitory effects could not be explained by GABA alone. By the 1950s and 1960s, experiments showed that glycine acted as an inhibitory neurotransmitter, particularly in the spinal cord and lower brain regions. This discovery helped explain how the nervous system fine-tunes movement and prevents excessive reflexes. So what does glycine actually do? At its core, glycine is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. When glycine binds to its receptors, it makes neurons less likely to fire. This inhibitory action is fast and precise. Glycine is especially important in circuits that require exact timing and coordination. If GABA provides widespread inhibition across the brain, glycine provides targeted inhibition, where precision matters most. Glycine plays a key role in motor control. In the spinal cord, glycine helps regulate reflexes and muscle coordination. It prevents opposing muscle groups from contracting at the same time. Glycine is also essential for sensory processing. It helps regulate how sensory signals are transmitted and filtered, particularly in auditory and spinal pathways. By suppressing irrelevant or excessive signals, glycine improves clarity and accuracy. This prevents the nervous system from becoming overwhelmed by noise. Interestingly, glycine also plays a role in learning and memory, but in a different way from other neurotransmitters. Glycine acts as a co-agonist at NMDA receptors, which are critical for synaptic plasticity. This means glycine does not excite neurons directly in this context. Instead, it enables glutamate to activate NMDA receptors effectively. Without glycine, certain forms of learning and memory formation would be impaired. Glycine is also involved in regulating breathing and basic life-sustaining functions. In the brainstem, glycine helps coordinate rhythmic motor patterns, including those involved in respiration. This highlights how fundamental glycine is to survival. Its role is not dramatic, but it is essential. Here are 5 everyday examples of glycine at work. First, when your movements feel smooth and coordinated, glycine is helping suppress unwanted muscle activation. Second, when reflexes are controlled rather than exaggerated, glycine is regulating spinal circuits. When sensory input feels precise rather than overwhelming, glycine is filtering neural signals. Fourth, when learning occurs at the synaptic level, glycine is enabling NMDA receptor function. Fifth, when breathing rhythms remain stable and automatic, glycine is supporting brainstem coordination. There are several important facts about glycine that are often overlooked. Glycine is a major inhibitory neurotransmitter in the spinal cord and brainstem. It acts faster than many other inhibitory systems. Disruptions to glycine signaling can lead to severe motor disorders, including exaggerated startle responses. Glycine works closely with GABA to maintain inhibitory balance. It also plays a supporting role in excitatory plasticity through NMDA receptors. Disorders involving glycine highlight its importance. In conditions such as hyperexlexia, also known as startle disease, glycine receptor dysfunction leads to excessive reflexes and muscle stiffness. This demonstrates how critical glycine is for normal motor control and inhibition. Even small disruptions can have dramatic effects. So what is the big picture? Glycine is not about emotion, motivation, or mood. It is about precision and control. It ensures that neural signals occur at the right time, in the right place, and with the right intensity. If glutamate provides excitation, GABA provides widespread inhibition, and glycine provides targeted precision. It keeps the nervous system orderly, efficient, and stable. Without glycine, the brain and spinal cord would lose fine control. Understanding glycine helps reveal how much of brain function depends on quiet, unseen regulation rather than dramatic signals.
If you enjoyed our channel, please click subscribe.